from me, and they had contacted me last September. They had looked at one of our homes that were priced at $95,000, and naturally with first-time home buyers, it takes a while for them to make that step forward. And John and Patty went through the normal trauma of making the decision. They looked at this home. It was a very modest home, a 1,200 square foot, 3-bedroom, bath and a half, single-car garage home. In the discussion and over time, they decided that they'd go down to their lender and make loan application to buy a home very similar to it. We gave them a price, and we told them that we were having to watch our lumber prices at the time because this was at the first of the year. And then as they went through the preliminary loan processing and came back for us for formal commitments to them in terms of price, we had to add this extra $3,500 to the cost of the home. Now, this great family that wanted to buy this first home had been renters and had 2 children and wanted to own their first home, 28 years old in that home buying age. They not only didn't achieve the American dream, they felt an American nightmare. They witnessed it because they had gone through all this anticipation, wanting to buy this home. Then all of a sudden, because of these increase in lumber prices, were told they could not qualify to buy the same house that they had looked at 60 days earlier. A great trauma. I think that this not only is representative here in Portland, but it's representative throughout this country. First-time homebuyers everywhere are feeling the impacts of these increased costs. And why that's significant is that we're forecasting as a national association 1.3 million housing starts this year, and a 10% reduction in those starts could truly forestall the economic recovery. Instead of losing the 25,000 and 35,000 jobs that have been talked around this table, we could be talking 200,000 jobs across the country. So the impacts are truly significant. Now, in terms of your question, Mr. President, and your question, Mr. Vice President, I think there are some things that we can do right now. You spoke about it earlier, Mr. Vice President, the countervailing duty on Canadian timber. If we remove the countervailing duty, that's not going to solve the problem, but it's an incremental step. In fact, it's a great first step forward. Second thing you also mentioned earlier, and that is removing the federal tax subsidy on export of raw logs overseas. I think the third thing that we can do, and again, those two in combination are not going to solve the problem, but they're, again, incremental steps. The third thing that we immediately need to do is probably make available the salvaged, the dead and dying timber that's available. And if we can do that, that's going to add to this potential supply shortage. And then fourth, the new technology issues, which several have talked about around the table. I think there's a grand opportunity there. Our National Research Center in Maryland spends a great deal of time working at new technologies, and we've in fact built a home just recently that's fully built out of recyclable products, steel studs that were made out of wrecked cars and the like. The problem is those technologies are going to take time to come online, and as Walter Minix just said, we've got to bring certainty and a stable wood supply to make sure that in fact we can build the housing that is demanded out there in America today. And I think that over time we can find and put in place these new technologies. And clearly the home builders want to work diligently toward that end because we've got a lot at stake to be able to find new resources and new alternatives and to manage these resources better. Then I think most importantly that we need to have today is certainty in terms of the wood supply, as Walter Minix said. And you can do that with a plan, and taking this plan to Congress and have some sufficiency language so that the timber sales that are sold, everybody knows that they're in fact going to be in the supply line. The confidence that you bring by being here at this table today alone has lowered the price of lumber today. And so we're very appreciative of what you've done in demonstrating your commitment to solving this. And then lastly, I think that we do need to review the Endangered Species Act and look at finding a way to balance it. I know Secretary Babbitt has been looking at that, and we want to work with him Home builders across America truly love the environment, Mr. President, Mr. Vice President. We understand what it means, but we also know that it's not just, it's more than simply the world around us. It's the home that our children and the men and women of America grow up in, they play in, they live in. And it's critically important that we bring resolve to this great debate. We want to work with you. I think in the areas of new technology, we've got a grand opportunity. People around this table have suggested many things, and we're going to continue working toward finding better solutions, but we've got to be able to make sure there's an adequate wood supply today and into the future to meet the demand for housing in America.
Mr. President, before we leave this question of why lumber prices have been going up, I'd like to ask Julie Norman to just briefly describe her view on this in order of importance, the factors that you think have led to the run-up in lumber prices.
From my perception, it is the scarcity that's been created due to the overcutting on the private lands. You know, the private lands were the primary source of supply in this country up until the 1950s because the private landowners didn't want the markets to be flooded with the public timber. And then in the 50s, the policies changed and we began to cut off the federal lands to supplement the depletion that had occurred on the private lands. So I think it is just a growing depletion worldwide that we face. And so all these alternatives that have been aired today are the obvious direction we're going to have to go.
Thanks.
Mr. Vice President, if I may, I think there's a much more direct relationship between what is happening to our federal forest timber supply and the price of lumber than what you just heard. In 1990, Region 6 of the U.S. Forest Service sold almost 5 billion feet of timber. In 1991, 1992, they sold about 800 million and 600 million board feet, respectively. Volume under contract, timber available to our industry in the Northwest declined from about 5 billion feet to less than 3 billion feet during that period of time, and as much as half of that is not available today because it's been encumbered by the Endangered Species Act. Existing contracts signed between the industry and the government cannot be operated because of the Endangered Species Act. And all you have to do is look at a graphical representation, which we were prepared to show you today, showing the decline in available timber supply at the same time that the lumber prices are going up, and recognize that the Northwest typically supplies a third of the dimension lumber in this country consumed by the home building industry, and it really doesn't take a genius to figure out that there's a cause and effect relationship that has driven up the price of lumber.
Well, I think that both of you are kind of saying the same thing when you're saying that a diminishing supply is responsible for it. It just depends it depends on the period of time over which you do the analysis, a long period of time or a shorter period of time, or the last few months when wet weather has had an effect.
Mr. Vice President, if you compare it in terms of constant dollars, you'll find that the prices are comparable to lumber in the 1970s.
And I might add something to that. The Congressional Research Service has looked at this, I believe, just recently. And always, if you look historically, in periods like this where we're coming out of a recession and demand is picking up for housing, lumber prices have gone up. And I think that we're looking at multiple factors here, but just the fact that two things are happening at the same time does not prove any causality behind them, and I think we have to take this longer perspective. The analysis says that the combination of coming out of a recession and the situation down in Florida have both combined to produce those higher prices. And I might add to that that the high price that finally we're getting the true price of the log into the log. And in my county, in the rural areas, the small landowners, who in California, according to the state figures, are the only people that over the last 2 decades have been growing more wood than they've been harvesting. Those people are now taking their logs to the market. And these are small farmers and small landowners, and they're getting a good price for them, and they're investing that money back into our communities, and that provides the incentive. The market, again, as this gentleman said, provides the incentive to invest in those lands.
So from your point of view, a rising price is a good thing then?
I think that we have to get the true price of the log into the log. And what we have been doing in the past, by putting all this federal timber on the market, looked at from an economic perspective, is we've provided a disincentive to the small landowner, the private landowner, to invest in their land. Okay, so we get and the other thing it's been doing is transferring income from people that depend on the watersheds, people like the fishermen, to the folks that cut the wood. So getting the true price into the log, I think, letting the market work the way it should work, getting the government out of the way again, is part of the solution.
Yes, sir.
Mr. President, I know that the subject of log exports has been raised a few times, and I think it would be helpful, based upon the questions this morning that indicated that there was something mystical about it, if I just took a couple of minutes to describe the current situation. There are no federal logs coming from federal log timber now being exported. There are no logs coming from state forests in Oregon and Washington now being exported. In the state of California, the proportion so it's all private lands and is predominantly second and third growth being exported in log form. A portion of the forest, not all of it, a portion of it. California, the amount relative to total harvest is so small, it's inconsequential. In Oregon, relative to the reduction, it's inconsequential. In Oregon, the same is true. The issue is in the state of Washington. Washington is an export state. One job in every 4 in the state of Washington depends on export. Airplanes, software, pulp, lumber, logs. From a private landowner's point of view, when these forests, this region was fundamentally different than the Midwest and the New England. In 1941, the private landowner said, we are going to manage these lands on a continuous basis. And they began protecting them. They built the roads. They put the fire protection in. They paid the taxes on them now since the Roosevelt administration, now for 55 years. And when you get ready to harvest, it's not that complicated. You do a look at it. What portion of this forest can I get more money for if I put into my own mills, if I have mills? What portion should I put into my competitor mills because they're specialized or take a particular species? And what portion can I put into a sawmill in Japan? It's not that mysterious because the price is higher. Our company last year, over the 2 states, the ratio was precisely, of all the material we handled, 72% of our total volume handled went into either our mills or the other domestic mills, and 28% went into the international market. The folks who made those investments 50 years ago had confidence in only 2 things. 1, will I be able to harvest this? And they did. They had confidence. And 2, that they could market. They couldn't predict what product. They didn't know there was even plywood going to develop, for example, or doors. And and the question really long-term, and I'd like to touch on the job question if I could. Long-term, the question is looking forward. Now that 50 years later, we have the ability to double the output on the same acre that we're now harvesting and take care of the fisheries habitat and do some other things that we perhaps need to do better. We have the possibility to double that output. Well, we do need the confidence. The small private landowner as well as the industrial landowner. We need the confidence of 2 very simple things. Will we be able to harvest it? Seriously in doubt with the way the OWL has been politicized and passed back and forth by regulatory agency, and will we be able to market it? And when I think it's terribly important to keep, when we talk about jobs, to think about the jobs in forestry, in research, and the landings, no matter where the log goes, in transporting the logs, in the mills, yes, in the jobs that are created on the ports for that portion that go export. The residuals from the mills go into pulp and paper. There are jobs created there. There are jobs created in Longview in our operation from recycling. Those are all skilled, well-paying jobs. I think it's also important to keep in track, at least in value-added sense. 15 years ago, in the Japan market, about 70% of our product in dollar value was raw material. 1992, on $1 billion worth of export, 70% was value added. It was doors, it was lumber, it was veneer, it was linerboard, it was pulp, it was paper, it was newsprint, and yes, it was logs. Not as many logs in absolute numbers, not as many logs proportionately. We were supplying our customers long term. We're trying to get the best we can. That ability gave us the chance, the opportunity, some people thought were crazy, in 1992, 3, to look at Longview, not close it down like Hoquiam had to, but to say, are we willing to put $400 million to modernize the Longview facility? And what did it have to be able to do? To be really a truly world-class facility, it had to be able to be cost and value competitive in international markets, and it had to meet the increasingly important water and air quality standards. A $400 million investment saved 1,000 permanent jobs, added 1,000 construction jobs, and we still have the same need, though. We need assurance that there's going to be raw material. Some of that raw material comes from mills, residuals located in Oregon and Washington who are dependent on the national forest. A lot of it comes from a small material off our own lands. And we need assurance that we can compete in international markets. So when we look at value added, we need to look at the whole stream, and surely there are opportunities that have been described here, but we also, from a private landowner's point of view, need the confidence or we will not attract the stewardship dollars and the regeneration dollars to permit this region 50 years from now to have the same quality of material available that we can have.
Mr. Bingham, could I
Yes.
follow up with a brief question?
Sure.
You said that it's no mystery on log exports, and I thought that was helpful. And you said you just look at what percentage you should sell here and what percentage you should export. When you make that calculation, does the tax incentive, which now has the federal taxpayers to a certain extent subsidizing or encouraging at least the export of logs, to what extent does that enter into your calculation of the percentage of logs that are exported?
Mr. Vice President, the incentive is one that applies to all products, to airplanes, to apples, to lumber, as well as to logs. The incentive that it was designed to make our industries competitive in world markets. Most industrialized countries waive their value-added tax on gross sales. There is a 5% income tax difference in the United States. Of course, we now, to all markets, we sold $1.8 billion, all markets, last year, including the about 24% to Japan in log form. We got a $19 million tax difference. It really does not make any difference between lumber and logs.
So
it does make us more competitively internationally.
If it, understand, I'm not proposing
No,
this,
I
but I'm
understand.
asking
I'm just trying
for,
to explain. I'm trying to explain.
but if we decided that there was a difference between exporting airplanes and exporting logs to countries that would allow logs to be sold but not wood products, then in considering that, if you say it doesn't make any difference, then if the purpose of it is to encourage you to do it, you wouldn't miss it?
I think I described the amount. I think the important thing to keep in mind, do we want our internationally competitive businesses internationally competitive, or don't we? I think we ought not to forget, there may be better ways. Congressman DeFazio and others has proposed alternatives to the export tax incentive, and we're certainly not wedded. I mean, there are lots of ways. I don't think we want to start making our sales internationally for any industry non-competitive.
The hour is getting late, and there's still 4 people who haven't spoken yet, so I want to give them a chance to have their say and have any back and forth that might arise out of it. Mr. Coates, Mr. Schmidt, you want to go next?
Vice President, Mr. President, thank you for inviting me today. This portion of the panel was where do we go from here? I represent the voice of those who haven't been heard through most of this, and that's the workers, those are the unemployed. I have a distribution warehouse that last year we put out 730,000 pounds of free food through. We're currently feeding 10,660 people in 2 counties. I hear Andy and some of the others talking about the beauty of the forest. When I go in to the beauty of the forest in the Capitol Forest and in the Park Service and in some of the rock quarries, we have people living there. They have no home, they have no water, and they have no power. If I was to divulge where these people were, they wouldn't have their children either. You hear from some of the others on training and retraining, you're talking about a lot of people with some very few selective jobs to retrain to. You have to break the gridlock on this thing and put people, at least a portion of people, back to work within the industry. I closed 39 mills between March of 1990 and March of 1991, just in Grays Harbor. The 650 who now have lost their jobs as of January 1 have not impacted to date. That impact, I feel, will probably hit around June. And we will feel another 3 times that many because of the indirect and the induced. I would hope, Mr. President, when we leave here today, I'll go back and try and provide some services to those folks that they can survive. I hope that you, Mr. President, will be committed to keep a hands on this matter personally. We're talking about a lot of human beings. They're not just statistics, they're names. There's a name attached to each one of those. And I hope that you and Congress can come to some agreement, break the gridlock, and just give us some help, please. Thank you.
Mr. Smith.
Thank you, Mr. President, Mr. Vice President, members of the Cabinet. I'm representing today the counties of Oregon, 36 counties, a few counties in the state of Washington who aren't represented today, and counties in California. Probably representing the rural counties a little more than I am the urban counties, issues like this. State of Oregon, 31 of our counties receive timber revenues, 18 of those from the ONC lands. 52% of our state is in federal ownership, slightly lesser percentages in the states of California and Washington. We certainly are partners in the services that we provide our citizens. County revenues are made up of some state revenue, some property taxes in the state of Oregon and other private fees, and about $200 million from federal lands go into providing our services, critical services that such as public safety, human services, mental and public health, environmental services. These are services that the demand is increasing as we see the problems that we're discussing here today go on and on and on. We need to find a level of stability. We have such a stake, and of course we are close to the people that are affected. They're knocking on our doors. We're knocking on yours. We're asking for your help, of course, in this. Now, where do we go from here? Wherever it is, it needs to be done very quickly. Our timber pipeline in most of the areas in Oregon will be running out in the next few months, approximately the fall, a few areas a year from now. The counties believe that we certainly need to be sensitive to biodiversity needs, all the environmental considerations, but we believe that we must be managing the forests, not locking it up. We think that there should be some short-term ASQ determination with some study continuing to determine a longer-range plan that take into consideration all the elements that all of us have been talking about today. And I think we've heard that position described by a number of people. It was mentioned here a few minutes ago about taking some wood out of the many, many thousands of acres of dead and dying timber, particularly in eastern Oregon, but we've got the problem coming over into western Oregon as well. It's a disaster, but there's also an opportunity to extract a lot of fiber, to put some people to work, and to do some of the long-term help that those stands need, reducing of densities that have come on since fire has been controlled by man, to modify the species in the stands to more correctly assimilate the stands as they used to be 150 years ago, things like this. Rural community development is also very important to us. If there is a way to cut some of the red tape, maybe gets past some of the traditional ways of doing business that agencies responsible for delivering these packages to the communities, that would be a big help. Our smaller communities do not have the sophistication and abilities to deal on and on with the programs when they're always changing. The goalposts are always moving, and if there's something that can be done with the agencies involved here, we'd sure appreciate that. We think anything that we can do in investing in the forests, and I'm talking about the forests that are going to be harvested in some manner or not, we think that investing in these forests is a very good idea. Thinning, road maintenance, brush control on young plantations, and certainly stream and riparian enhancement could be done. We've heard a little bit about tax incentives on private lands. A lot can be done with the carrot rather than the stick. In all of this, if there can be some preference for local displaced workers, that probably is helpful. But basically, that's who have the skills to do the job in the first place, and they'll be involved, I'm sure. We need to be thinking about family wage jobs, not entry-level wages. The counties have been a partner in all the consequences, and we want to continue to be a partner in the solutions. And I want to thank you very much on behalf of the counties for taking the leadership and initiative for bringing all of us together today. And if there's any way that counties can support you in accomplishing our goals, we want to be a part of it. Thank you.
Mr. Olivier.
Thank you, Mr. President, Mr. Vice President, panels of the Cabinet, ladies and gentlemen. It's getting late, I know, and I can tell you a whole lot, but I'll make it real brief. I'm a harbor commissioner in the Port of Eureka, and I'm also showing some diversity. I've been working as a longshoreman for 27 years, and in addition to those, 13 years in the plywood mill. So basically, I've worked 40 years of my life tied to the timber industry, the lumber industry, if you will. And make no mistakes about it here, you know. And my horse is always going to come in, Mr. President, always. All I heard today was jobs. We talked about jobs all day, you know. And yeah, there's going to be some cutbacks, and that's what I'm here to answer the question. You know what I would do, Mr. President? I would do like Truman did when he brought the troops home from World War II. He put America, he put America to work. And I'm talking about retraining, And I know Vice President Gore is going to ask me where. And I would say, well, get to the central labor, in your town. Get to your trades councils. They're willing to help you at this time. I survived World War II as a child, and I can tell you when times get tough, people get together. Compassion takes in. I would go a little further. I would go an educational program like the GI Bill. People want dignity. We want dignity in this world. And the other one, low-cost business loans I would look into. I would have those people building homes, libraries. We haven't had a library in our area since LBJ. It's been a while. We must educate our children and build some stores. I would go, President Clinton in his campaigning talked about the infrastructure, and that's what I'm doing as a commissioner. We have, where you have low-cost, affordable land, and you have deep water, you have to create these economic coalitions. We just loaned $200,000 to one of the entities in our town, a railroad that's been dying for a long time, and the opposition is saying, let it die, Maybe the trucking companies will take over the area. We're fighting for our lives, Mr. President, in Northern California. We're going to make it. With your help, we're going to make it. The timber industry has been there, and it will always be there. But it will be there in small numbers. Make no mistakes about it. How do you keep, I heard earlier, yes, the wages are in the pulp industry. That's true. They even make more than $50,000 a year, which is more than I make as a longshoreman. Our major producer of pulp in the area has just moved to Chile, with the World Bank financing that mill, and it's very efficient. And they just laid off 262 of our workers, which is 44% of my work. So I'm basically kind of displaced myself at this point. But hey, you close the door, you open the window. We're not going to die here, we're going to make it. There's other ways we can import logs. They're going to come, the bad guy, the Russians aren't so stupid, by the way. We could have had a shot at Russian logs. The Japanese, the Germans, the Koreans beat us to Russia. And you know what the Russians told us lately is that we want those jobs in our country, and they're right. But there's logs, sure, there's logs available through New Zealand. New Zealand planted logs 40 years ago. They had foresight, And they have a 40-year log. Now, sure, it's going to help us if they, I hope they flow to the port of Eureka. But what I'm saying right here is that the best social program that the president can give all of us here is a job, right? That's what we want. And those I'm going to close. It's been a pleasure. It's it's been a pleasure. Tell you what. You have energized, both of you have energized our country. I was always positive, but now I can smile, Hey, hey, we were in for 4, and I said we were in for 4 more, and we're in for 8 more. So, they can eat a lot of crow for a long time. Tell you what, we got to hold her positive. Thank you very much.
Gus, he makes you look almost repressed. Mr. Strong.
Thank you very much. Mr. President, Mr. Vice President, and distinguished members of your cabinet, not too long ago, another president from another administration suggested that Indian people were placed on reservations so they could be humored. That is a very sad commentary about the way that America at one time treated American Indian people. We come here because we believe that your administration represents the redeeming qualities of government-to-government relationships between American Indians and the United States of America, and we appreciate that very sincerely. The natives to this land have existed for at least 35,000 years, which is an estimated 700 generations. Present-day America is approximately 10 generations old. For 690 generations, ecosystem management was defined, illustrated, and scientifically concluded by each generation of American Indians living on this land. Diverse life forms were naturally integrated and in abundance. In our time as natives to this land, our forests grew as many salmon as trees. In the short 10 generations, one broad sweep of the geological second hand, America has reduced its life forms to struggling endangered species. There is perhaps a lesson that we can learn from this, and that is that ecosystems management, once politicized, always invite an irreducible conflict with human intervention. I was asked to consider, for the purposes of this roundtable, where do we go from here? And Mr. President, there are an estimated 5 million American Indians, some watching here today, and they may be tempted to quote an old Hollywood Indian named Tonto and say, "What do you mean we, Kimasabi?" But Mr. President, quoting fictional characters and fighting Hollywood characters belong to another administration. You have elevated our relationships to a very respectable place, and we appreciate that. Seriously, in reality, where we go from here, we go home to worried families and stressed ecosystems. In actuality, tomorrow, we go out and we build coalitions across all ideological lines. We unite as family, and we begin to do the work that lets us leave behind a legacy of love for our natural resources to be enjoyed in perpetuity by all humans yet to walk this earth. Mr. Vice President Gore, you have enriched us with a wonderful book that discusses the organizing principles of environmentalism, and we thank you for that. Mr. President Clinton, you have been chosen to write one page on the book of American history. American Indians, natives to this land, hope and pray that the pen that you wield will be guided by the sacred beings who created and authored the perfect laws of nature by which all mankind has existed since the beginning of time. And we thank you once again for coming to our home in the Northwest, and we wish you well in your travels. And we understand that status quo management is completely unacceptable. We must go on. We cannot linger amidst the technological pollution that we have created. And as disciplined followers, we are eager to follow your lead and hope that we can all see a better future for our children. Thank you very much.
I'd like to say that I'd heard him speak before when I asked him to be the last speaker, but I hadn't. Just the hand of Providence. I want to thank all of you for being here and for sitting through this long day, and all of the participants for everything you've done. I'd like to thank the Cabinet for coming and participating, and the Vice President and our staff for all the work they did to put this meeting together. One of the things that has come out of this meeting to me loud and clear is that you want us to try to break the paralysis that presently controls the situation. to move and to act. I hope that as we leave here, we are more committed to working together to move forward than perhaps we were when we came. I tell you, I'll never forget what I've heard today. The stories, the pictures, the passion from all of you. In a funny way, even when you were disagreeing, every one of you was a voice for change. Every one of you was saying, we can't possibly do any worse than to stay within the framework which has now undermined our ability to work together and to build a sense of common community. Too many people are being hurt and too many resources are being threatened, and we're going to do our best to turn this away from at least the short-term politics of just trying to avoid the tough decisions. I intend to direct the Cabinet and the entire administration to begin work immediately to craft a balanced, a comprehensive, a long-term policy. And I will direct the Cabinet to report back to me within 60 days to have a plan to end this stalemate. In the meanwhile, I want each of our cabinets to look within the departments to determine which policies are at odds with each other. It is true, as I've said many times, that I was mortified when I began to review the legal documents surrounding this controversy to see how often the departments were at odds with each other, so that there was no voice of the United States. I want the cabinet members to talk with each other to try to bring these conflicts to an end, which at their extreme have had our own agencies suing one another in courts, often over issues which are hard to characterize as monumental. I want everyone to examine his or her approach to existing legal and administrative proceedings to see if inadvertently any of us are hampering the march toward a solution of the larger issues or even toward the particular ones now in litigation. Regardless of what we are doing, our efforts must be guided, it seems to me, by 5 fundamental principles. First, we must never forget the human and the economic dimensions of these problems. Where sound management policies can preserve the health of forest lands, sales should go forward. Where this requirement cannot be met, we need to do our best to offer new economic opportunities for year-round, high-wage, high-skilled jobs. Second, as we craft a plan, we need to protect the long-term health of our forests, our wildlife, and our waterways. They are, as the last speaker said, a gift from God, and we hold them in trust for future generations. Third, our efforts must be, insofar as we are wise enough to know it, scientifically sound, ecologically credible, and legally responsible. Fourth, the plan should produce a predictable and sustainable level of timber sales and non-timber resources that will not degrade or destroy our forest environment. And fifth, to achieve these goals, we will do our best, as I said, to make the federal government work together and work for you. We may make mistakes, but we will try to end the gridlock within the federal government. And we will insist on collaboration, not confrontation. We will do our best to do our part. We will act with a single purpose and a single agenda once we have a chance to get all these departments working on their respective responsibilities. But I want to say, too, that all of you have demonstrated to me today your willingness to do your part. I ask you not to let this be the end of it. This conference has established a dialogue. Even when it was somewhat funny between Mr. Kerr and Ms. Mader, it was still a dialogue. And it's got to continue between us and you and among yourselves. You have got to be a part of this solution. Even if we make the most enlightened possible decisions under the circumstances, they will be all the more resented if they seem to be imposed. Without a continuing mechanism for people whose lives will be affected here to be involved. So when you leave here today, I ask you to keep working for a balanced policy that promotes the economy, preserves jobs, and protects the environment, even as you may disagree, as Mr. Thomas said, over how the word balance should be defined. When you hit an impasse, I plead with you not to give up and don't turn against your neighbors. You don't have to fight in a court of law anymore. You can work with us to try to have a long-term solution. If you feel frustrated, at times all of us will, I ask you to stay at the table and to keep talking and keep trying to find common ground. I don't want this situation to go back to posturing, to positioning, to the politics of division that has characterized this difficult issue in the past. I hope we can stay in the conference room and stay out of the courtroom. If we don't give up or give in to deadlock or divisiveness or despair, I think we can build a more prosperous and a more secure future for our communities and for our children. And I think we'll be proud years from now that we were here today. I thank you for caring and for coming, for speaking out and for reaching out. And I ask you to continue to work with us so that this Forest Conference is the beginning, not the end, of a solution. But we will move. We will move, and I will do my best to assume the responsibility the American people have given me to try to break this deadlock in a responsible way. I just ask you to remember that this listening cannot be a one-shot deal. We've got to continue to work together, and I think if we do, we'll all be pleased with the results. Thank you very much.
You were great. You were great. You can't leave without sending me the cards. I can't go home without it, kid. You guys are great.
Well, welcome back to the studios of OPB. I've been your host for this gavel-to-gavel coverage of the Northwest Forest Conference. I'm Steve Amon. Well, it's been a long day, and it's not over for us yet. I'd like to invite you all to join OPB later this evening when Northwest Week, our public affairs program, offers you a special hour-long report on the Forest Conference starting at 9. We'll be showing you highlights of today's testimony, along with an in-depth analysis of the proceedings by 2 panels of experts. We hope to see you then. And I want to thank you for staying with us throughout the day. This was one event that could have a big and profound impact on much of the Pacific Northwest, and we felt compelled to offer it to you uncut. I also want to take just a moment to thank the people who helped bring this to you. Number one was Channel 2. They provided the pool video from the conference that you've been watching. Gary Sheetal was our director. Craig Watson and Les Gibbons were in master control. Neil Bloom was our technical director. Julie Draper ran prompter. Gene Coons was electronic graphics. Patrick Ansborough ran camera for me. John Frazee and Steve Noble were audio. And I also want to say that we got paid to be here, but there were 2 people that came in today that donated their time. Very special cause, and I really want to take a moment to thank them, and that's the folks from LNS Captioning. They provide us with closed captioning. Their names are Carol Studenman and Robin Nodland. I got it this time right, not Robin. I want to thank both of you.